Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to really get under the hood of complex ideas and hopefully give you a clearer understanding. Today, we're tackling something maybe a bit different, a meta issue, you could say.
Yeah, that's right.
We're not just asking what research you should do, but digging into the how, the craft, really, of doing research well, especially in law and the social sciences. And our guide for this is a really insightful article by Sundhya Pahuja that tries to redefine what we even mean by methodology.
It really does, because, when people hear methodology, their minds usually jump to one of two things.
Right, like what?
Either it's like a fixed list of techniques, how to do an interview, run stats, that sort of thing.
Okay, the technical stuff.
Or it's the big theoretical labels, I'm a Marxist, I use feminist theory, post-structuralism, big buckets.
Gotcha.
But Pahuja sort of pushes back against both. She says, look, these often don't quite capture or even help the actual doing of research.
So what's her alternative then?
She shifts the focus. It's not about static theory, not just about the toolbox of techniques. It's about methodology as a dynamic practice, a scholarly habit almost.
What practice?
Specifically, the practice of writing about how you're doing the research, continuously reflecting and articulating your process as you write.
Okay, interesting. So the methodology isn't just chosen up front, it's developed and explained through the writing.
That's a big part of it, yeah.
Okay, let's map this out. Our mission for this deep dive, yours and mine, and for you listening, is to explore this idea. The core idea, the thesis, seems to be about getting 4 key things to line up perfectly.
Exactly. It's about cultivating this research approach where, number 1, the object of inquiry, the specific thing you're looking at.
Okay.
Number 2, the research question, what you're asking about that thing.
Right.
3, the theoretical lens, the concepts you're using to see it.
Your perspective.
And 4th, the significance why any of it matters. All these need to achieve this necessary coherence, a really tight self-aware fit.
A fit. I like that. It implies deliberate construction.
It is deliberate construction. That's the whole point. Pahuja argues this fit isn't luck. It's not magic. It takes real craft, constant checking, being really self-aware about your choices.
So our job today is to break down how the article lays out that craft.
Yep, we'll look at the structure, the key analytical moves Pahuja identified.
We'll explain the jargon, make it clear.
And hopefully leave you with some solid reflection questions to help you think about your own scholarly work in this maybe new way.
Okay, so to really get why Pahuja's idea of methodology as practice is, well, different, we need to understand what she's pushing against. What are those traditional views? You mentioned 2 earlier. Let's start with the first one. Methodology as technique.
Right. This view is pretty common, especially in fields like international law, very doctrinal fields.
Okay.
It basically treats methodology as a kind of instruction manual, a systematic rundown of the accepted ways to argue and persuade within that specific discipline.
So the rules of the game for making a believable legal point.
Exactly. It's the field defining what counts as a plausible argument. Pahuja mentioned scholars like Koskaniemi, Tolomon in this context. The focus is all on the process.
Like how you show something is customary international law.
Precisely. Or how you interpret a treaty in a way other international lawyers will nod along with, find acceptable. It's about meeting the criteria for disciplinary plausibility. Very internal.
Okay, that's view 1. What about view 2? Methodology as theory. This sounds more like grad school seminars.
Totally. This is where you get the list, right?
Yeah.
Discussing, comparing theoretical approaches, legal positivism, feminist jurisprudence, critical legal studies, TWAIL, third world approaches to international law.
Right, the isms.
Yeah, the isms. And this is where Pahuja points out something quite political can happen with this kind of method talk.
How so?
Well, the focus shifts from technique, from how you do things, to policing intellectual boundaries, deciding who's in and who's out.
Gatekeeping.
Absolutely. She uses the example, quite a famous one, of the 1999 American Journal of International Law Symposium on method.
What happened there?
Well, contributions from TWAIL scholars who were fundamentally questioning the history and assumptions of international law were essentially sidelined.
How?
By defining the conversation about method very narrowly, focusing only on certain established theoretical traditions, it effectively shut out these critical voices.
So defining methodology as just a list of acceptable theories can be a way to control the conversation, maintain the status quo.
Pahuja argues it absolutely can. It becomes less about improving research and more about maintaining power structures within the discipline. Who gets to speak, whose work counts as valid.
Okay, so against that backdrop, Pahuja's view methodology as craft or practice feels like a very deliberate sidestep.
It is. It shifts the focus away from which theoretical flag you fly
Right.
to the detailed scholarly practice of writing about how you actually carry out your research. It's less what theory you pick, more how you use whatever tools you use, and critically how you justify those choices.
So the emphasis is on the execution and the justification of that execution.
Exactly. And because this focuses on practice, on technique, rather than just grand theory, Pahuja notes that this kind of work often gets, well, unfairly dismissed.
Now dismissed.
It gets lumped into the how to write a PhD category. Practical advice, maybe seen as a bit remedial, not high theory. Academic self-help, almost.
But she's saying that's a mistake.
A big one. She argues this practical, reflective aspect is absolutely core to being a good jurist, a good scholar. It's what elevates the work beyond just technical skill. This detailed writing about your own method, she suggests names like methodography or jurisography.
Methodography. Interesting. So why is this practical shift so important? What's the payoff?
It has some really concrete benefits, actually. First, think about just talking to colleagues. Communication.
Okay.
Imagine you have, say, a liberal scholar and a Marxist scholar, both looking at international trade. They might have fundamentally different views on why the system is the way it is. They might never agree on the big picture theory.
Right, probably not.
But if they both adopt this practical methodology, they can talk constructively about the mechanics of their research.
Oh.
They can discuss, what archives did you look at? How did you frame your research question? How did you justify linking this theory to that evidence? They find a common language in the practice, the craft, even if the underlying dogma is different.
It's huge. It allows for intellectual exchange beyond just agreeing on the starting assumptions.
Exactly. It focuses the conversation on rigor, on application, not just ideology.
Okay, benefit one, communication. What else?
Second, it changes how we teach methodology. Massively.
How so?
It becomes less about forcing students to pick a theoretical camp and more about training them in a scholarly ethos.
Ethos. Define that carefully, not just shared beliefs.
No, not shared beliefs or faith. Pahuja uses ethos in its original Greek sense, meaning both custom and character. So teaching this way is training in conduct. It links the individual researcher's character, their diligence, their self-reflection, with the accepted custom or practice of the scholarly community. It's about learning a shared way of doing rigorous, self-aware research.
A way of doing things that can apply across different topics and theories?
Precisely. It avoids turning methodology class into theoretical indoctrination. It's about building good scholarly habits.
Makes sense. And the third benefit, you mentioned communicating outside the field.
Yeah, this is a big one for international lawyers, but really for any specialized field. Communicating with interdisciplinary audiences or even just non-lawyers.
The curse of knowledge problem.
Totally. If you're talking to political scientists or sociologists, you can't just drop a term like estoppel and expect nods.
Right.
By treating methodology as this practice of writing about how you did the research, you're forced to actually explain your specific disciplinary tools, your assumptions, the limits of your terms. What does customary international law actually mean in practice? How did you identify it?
So it makes your work more transparent and accessible.
Exactly. It helps you connect with people who don't share your starting points, which is vital. It bridges those disciplinary gaps.
Okay, let's get practical then. Pahuja says we need to stop thinking of reading, interpreting, writing, researching as these neat, separate stages.
Yeah, she argues they all kind of blur together in the actual process. It's all research writing.
Research writing as a specific genre.
Yeah.
That's important.
Crucial. A genre isn't just defined by content, but by its form, its style, the expectations it sets up.
Like a novel versus a newspaper article. Different rules, different reader expectations.
Exactly. And methodology, in Pahuja's view, is a specific kind of writing genre within that bigger genre of scholarly research. It has its own implicit rules and reader expectations.
And in law, we often pick up these genres, writing a judgment, a memo, a law review article almost unconsciously by copying.
Yeah, often by osmosis, by mimicry. We read tons of articles, mostly for their arguments, their content, maybe to critique them.
But not necessarily for how they're put together.
Right. Pahuja pushes for conscious awareness. We need to learn to read for craft. How did the author structure this? Why this move here? By thinking about the genre explicitly, we become much more intentional writers. We understand there's a kind of contract with the reader.
A contract based on expectations. Pahuja identifies 3 big ones, right? Formal expectations that shape scholarly writing.
Yes, 3 key ones.
Let's break them down. First, original contribution.
This is the big one. The reader expects the work to say something new.
Sounds daunting.
It can be, but Pahuja frames it practically. It doesn't have to be earth-shattering. It means showing the object you're studying in a new light, adding a perspective, maybe refining a concept, even slightly.
So just summarizing what others have said isn't enough. We're just reporting facts.
No, that fails the contract. Good research has to push the boundary of what's known, even just a little nudge. Add something to the conversation.
Okay, makes sense. Expectation 2, critical engagement. This one sounds tricky. People might confuse it with, like, critical legal studies or something.
Yeah, that's a common confusion. But Pahuja is clear. This is a generic expectation for all scholarship, regardless of your theoretical stance.
So what does it mean then?
It means you can't just take received wisdom, what everyone already says or assumes uncritically. You have to show you've questioned it, reflected on it.
An anti-assumption clause.
Good way to put it. The reader expects you've thought about why you're defining your subject this way, why you're using these particular concepts. It's basic critical thinking baked into the scholarly ethos, not taking things at face value.
Right. And the third expectation, rigor. This word gets thrown around a lot.
It does, and Pahuja points out it can be weaponized. There's the good kind of rigor, and then there's the rigor mortis version used to shut down different approaches.
Okay, explain the difference. What's the good kind?
The good kind, the practical definition Pahuja supports, is simply that the research must be careful, thorough, meticulous, and importantly, it has to be seen to be careful, transparent in its methods.
Wise.
So it's reliable. So future researchers can trust your analysis, follow your steps, build on your work. It ensures durability.
Okay, carefulness and transparency. What's the bad kind? The rigor mortis.
That's when rigor becomes a gatekeeping tool. When established figures insist that only their specific, often highly technical methods count as rigorous.
For example.
Maybe insisting that only quantitative analysis is rigorous, dismissing qualitative work. Or in law, perhaps saying only a very specific type of doctrinal analysis or legal history is properly rigorous, thereby excluding sociological perspectives or theoretical critiques that are perfectly rigorous within their own disciplinary norms, but just look different.
So rigor becomes a way to police the boundaries, keep out inconvenient challenges.
Exactly. Pahuja argues true rigor is about care and transparency, not about conforming to one narrow definition of acceptable method.
Okay, this leads to a really key insight Pahuja offers. Genre confusion. What's the most common mix-up?
The absolute most common, she argues, is confusing scholarly writing with the policy paper.
Why is that such a problem? Their aims are different.
Fundamentally different. The whole purpose of a policy paper is problem solving.
Okay.
It's designed to give recommendations, tell policymakers what they should do or could do to fix something, achieve a practical goal, like drafting a better treaty clause. It doesn't necessarily need deep theory. It needs to be actionable, politically feasible.
Right. Get something done.
But the purpose of scholarly research, especially in law and humanities, is often the opposite. It's problematization.
Problematization, not solving, but making things more complex.
In a way, yes. Challenging the reader's easy assumptions, showing the hidden structures, the complexities, the unintended consequences behind the problem, rather than just offering a quick fix for the surface issue.
Okay, I see the clash. And Pahuja has a warning here.
A major one. This is a really practical takeaway for anyone listening who writes scholarly work.
What is it?
If your scholarly article or book finishes with a list of concrete policy recommendations, here's what we should do. That section is almost always the weakest, most speculative, and least enduring part of the whole piece.
Really? Yeah.
Because the deep analysis, the problematization, that's the lasting scholarly contribution. The specific policy fix, that can become outdated overnight due to political shifts, new events, whatever. It's often conjectural.
And the risk.
The risk is if a reader disagrees with your specific solution, which is quite likely, as solutions are often debatable, they might dismiss your entire preceding analysis, even if it was brilliant and solid.
Because you offered it up to be judged by policy standards.
Exactly. You accidentally invited judgment based on a genre contract, the policy paper contract, that your core scholarly work wasn't designed to fulfill. Be very careful about tacking on those solutions.
Okay, so if the mission is problematization, not simple solutions, then the research question becomes absolutely central. It sets the whole direction.
It's the engine, really. And Pahuja argues quite strongly that the way you frame your question massively impacts whether you can meet those genre expectations we just talked about. Originality, critical engagement, rigor.
So some questions are just better than others for scholarly work?
Better in the sense that they inherently push you towards problematization. Better questions are those that force you, the researcher, to really interrogate your own assumptions and actively problematize the object you're studying.
What does that mean in practice? Problematize the object.
Well, in legal research, for example, it often means stepping back from the easy assumption that a particular law or treaty, say a human rights convention, is automatically the right tool, or even an effective tool for achieving the social good it claims to aim for. You question that link.
So you're moving away from, does this treaty work, towards something else?
Sort of. You're definitely moving away from solution-seeking questions. Pahuja makes a strong case for framing questions around how and what.
How and what questions? Give me some examples.
Like, how can we understand the underlying power dynamics shaped by this legal framework? Or what are the actual, perhaps unintended, social or economic effects of implementing Law X?
These feel more descriptive, more analytical.
They are, and that's the point. They are far more likely to lead to answers that are reliable, verifiable, and frankly endure longer than answers to big causation questions.
Why?
Because they naturally guide the researcher to choose a specific object and then problematize it, look closely at its workings, and crucially, they help prevent what Pahuja calls slippage between registers.
Slippage between what?
Between the analytical register describing and explaining how things are, how they work, and the normative register prescribing how things should be, what we ought to do.
The is versus the ought, keeping them distinct.
Yes. Strong scholarly craft maintains that distinction clearly. How and what questions help you stay firmly in the analytical zone while doing the core research?
Okay, but I have to push back a bit here. Especially for lawyers or people studying politics. Isn't there an ethical pull towards the normative? Towards asking should? Towards trying to make things better? If we only ask how and what, are we just becoming detached observers, afraid to argue for change?
That's a really important tension, and Pahuja doesn't say never engage the normative. The argument isn't to abandon ethics or politics.
Okay.
The argument is about structure and clarity. Do the rigorous analytical work first. Keep it distinct. The warning is specifically about framing your main research question, the driving question of the project, around why and especially should. Let's unpack why those are problematic starting points for scholarly inquiry.
Okay, let's start with should questions. Why are they less suited for this kind of research?
Should questions, the ones looking for solutions, recommending reforms, filling perceived gaps in the law, tend to fail the scholarly requirements because they nearly always rest on unexamined assumptions.
Like what?
Like assuming that passing a new law automatically leads to real social change, or assuming that concepts like human rights or sustainable development are inherently good or neutral without interrogating their history or effects.
So they skip the critical engagement step.
Often, yes. They accept the existing framework and just try to tinker within it. Pahuja notes this often leads to gap spotting, finding a little hole in the doctrine and proposing a patch. That might be useful for some things, like maybe a policy brief, but it rarely produces deep, original scholarly insight.
Okay, that makes sense for should. What about why questions?
Well,
It feels so fundamental. Why is the world like this? Isn't that the ultimate driver?
Emotionally, yes. They often come from passion, from outrage, from deep curiosity. Why is there injustice? Why did this happen? They're great rhetorical motivators. But as analytical research questions for a specific project, like a PhD or a book or even an article, they are incredibly difficult, maybe impossible to answer reliably.
Why is that?
Because why questions are fundamentally about causation and proving definitively that A caused B and excluding C, D, E, and F as potential causes, especially in complex social or legal phenomena, that's extraordinarily hard to do rigorously within the scope of most research projects.
You end up speculating.
You often have to. It's much more feasible to provide a careful, evidence-based, reliable answer to how something works, or what its effects seem to be. You can use the why question, perhaps in your introduction, to frame the puzzle, to grab the reader. But the actual analytical engine driving the research should, Pahuja argues, be built around how, or what.
This leads us to maybe the most memorable concept in the article, the difference between bendy questions and straight-line questions.
Yes. This is such a helpful visualization.
Explain straight-line questions first.
Straight-line questions are the kind that often come from expertise, from assuming you know the path. They draw a direct line. Here's the problem, here's the obvious solution.
Like using a legal tool to fix a social ill.
Exactly. They often assume that the normative instrument, the law, the treaty, connects directly to the desired practical outcome. Pahuja warns that this kind of thinking, this conflation, is precisely how dominant worldviews like Eurocentrism in international law get reproduced unthinkingly.
How so?
By just accepting the existing analytical frame, often one provided by powerful actors, as the natural or only way to think about the problem. It avoids questioning the frame itself. It's a kind of intellectual shortcut that preserves the status quo.
Okay, so straight-line questions can be intellectually lazy, almost.
Yeah.
What about bendy questions?
Bendy questions are the antidote. They're built on that how can we understand foundation.
They curve around the problem.
They invite complexity. They push for new descriptions of things we thought we understood. They look for the nuances, the contradictions, the surprising effects.
So they focus on process and effects.
Yes. How does this legal arrangement actually work on the ground? What happens when this law interacts with political realities or economic forces? What are the real effects, intended or not?
Pahuja uses an example about food security to make this really clear, right? The potential slippage.
It's a perfect illustration. Imagine a project asking if a new international initiative improves food security.
Okay. Seems like a standard question.
But food security is often a specific legal or bureaucratic category. It has a definition in reports and treaties.
Right.
That might be quite different from the practical real-world goal of simply reducing hunger for actual people.
Ah, so the researcher might just measure success against the bureaucratic definition.
Exactly. If you just assume the legal term food security is the same as the real-world goal, less hunger, you skip the crucial scholarly step of problematizing the term itself. The research then just measures if the legal instrument did what the legal instrument said it would do on its own terms.
And misses the bigger picture.
It might completely miss how that very legal framework of food security actually operates in practice. Maybe it organizes power or distributes resources in ways that don't reduce hunger or even make it worse for some.
So a bendy question would be different.
A bendy question would ask something like, how does the legal architecture defining food security actually structure the flow of resources and power in this specific context? It opens up a much richer, more critical inquiry.
Okay, so we've got our bendy question, carefully crafted using how or what, designed to problematize. Great. But even a bendy question is usually too big, too abstract to tackle directly.
Absolutely. You can't study how power works in the abstract. You need something concrete to grab onto.
Which brings us to the next step, defining the precise object of inquiry, the thing.
Exactly. The object is that specific thing. Maybe it's a particular treaty negotiation, a key court case, a specific set of institutional practices, a historical event that you're going to use as your lens or your case study to investigate your bigger question.
It's about narrowing the focus, operationalizing the question.
Precisely. And the very practical task here, Pahuja emphasizes, is defining your archive.
Archive, like dusty boxes.
Could be, but it just means the actual body of material you commit to analyzing. What's going to be metaphorically or literally on your desk is these specific laws, these policy papers from this 5-year period, transcripts from these parliamentary debates, judgments from this court.
So defining the archive is about setting boundaries.
Yes. It's absolutely crucial for managing the scope of the research. It makes it feasible. It makes it rigorous because you're clear about what you did and didn't look at. No vague hand-waving about the literature.
Pahuja uses her own major work, Decolonizing International Law, as an example of this object construction, right?
Yeah, it's a great example. The huge overarching question was something like, what happened when the newly independent states, the Third World, tried to use international law to challenge the old colonial power structures?
That's massive. How do you even start?
You can't answer that directly. So the research was disciplined, focused, by constructing 3 very precise objects or moments to study that larger question.
What were they?
The institutional debates surrounding, first, the process of decolonization itself. Second, the specific claims around permanent sovereignty over natural resources. And third, the broader assertion of the rule of international law by these new states.
And the archive?
The archive was then tightly focused on the records of the institutional debates within the UN and related bodies during those specific periods. See how it moves from a grand, almost unanswerable question to a sharp, manageable, concrete analytical task.
Yeah, that makes it much clearer. But what about the common situation where a researcher starts the other way around? They get fascinated by an object first, Maybe a really interesting court decision.
Very common. You stumble upon a case, an event, a text that seems incredibly rich or puzzling.
So what's the process then? You need to do that recursive tweak Pahuja talks about.
Exactly. If you start with the object, say, the famous Nicaragua case at the International Court of Justice, you can't just stop there and describe it. That's just reporting.
So you have to step back.
You have to step back and ask, okay, what is scholarly, interesting, or analytically problematic about this case? What larger question can this specific case help me investigate?
Turning the object into a lever for a bigger question.
Precisely. Pahuja points out that the classic articles in Nicaragua weren't just summaries of the judgment. They used the case as an object to ask fundamental questions about, say, customary international law, CIL. How does the court identify it? How does it use evidence? Does it stretch the concept? The case became the object, but the question was about CIL.
So it's a constant back and forth refinement. Question shapes object, object refines question.
Yes, that recursive checking is vital. It ensures you're making a distinct scholarly contribution, not just describing something everyone already knows about. You justify why this object is the right way into this question.
Okay, question crafted, object archive defined. What's next? The second key element of the method, the lens of interpretation, the theoretical side.
Right. This is about the other literature. Not your primary archive material, but the books, the articles, the concepts, the theoretical tools you're going to use to read and make sense of your archive.
So choosing your analytical toolkit.
Essentially, yes. Which ideas, which traditions of thought will help you illuminate the material in your archive in the most insightful way to answer your specific question? This is where the theory talk comes back in, but in a very functional way.
Functional how?
It's not about just declaring allegiance to a theory. It's about selecting theoretical tools because they work for the task at hand. And again, it's recursive. You constantly check, are these concepts from Foucault, or maybe from systems theory, actually helping me understand this set of documents in relation to this question? Or are they just jargon I'm pasting on?
The choice of this lens, Pahuja argues, determines something quite interesting. Our scholarly kinship.
This is a really provocative point.
It seems counterintuitive. You'd think your kinship would be with people studying the same topic.
That's what we usually assume. All the trade lawyers hang out together. All the human rights scholars hang out together.
Right.
But Pahuja flips it. She argues your deepest scholarly commonality, your easiest intellectual conversations, will be with people who share your methodological and theoretical approach, regardless of the topic.
Give me that example again.
A liberal international trade lawyer, she suggests, probably has more fundamental common ground, easier communication, shared assumptions about how to build an argument with a liberal international human rights scholar than they do with another international trade lawyer who approaches the topic from, say, a Marxist or a critical feminist perspective.
So it's not what you study, but the way that you study it that defines your tribe.
Not so much what you do as the way that you do it. That's the core idea. Your kinship lies in the how, the analytical framework, the interpretative lens, much more than in the what's the subject matter.
What are the implications of that? Should we be seeking out collaborators based on method rather than topic?
It suggests we should certainly be aware of it. Maybe read more widely across topics within our methodological kind. It could strengthen the rigor of our own interpretive lens by seeing how similar approaches are applied elsewhere.
But isn't there a danger here of creating echo chambers? If the liberal trade lawyer only talks to the liberal human rights lawyer, won't they miss crucial insights about trade? From the Marxist trade lawyer, who actually knows the specific material better, even if their lens is different.
That's a potential risk, sure. Siloing is always a danger, but Pahuja's framework actually offers a way around that, too.
Yeah.
Because remember, the framework is about the practice of justification. So even if the liberal and the Marxist trade lawyers have fundamentally different theoretical lenses, if they've both adopted this practical methodology, they can still talk productively. They can explain their archives. They can lay out the structure of their questions. They can critique each other's research process, the care, the evidence, the fit, even if they don't agree on the ultimate political interpretation.
So the shared language of craft allows critique across theoretical divides.
That's the idea. It fosters critique based on rigor and transparency of method, not just based on whether you agree with the conclusion or the ideology.
Okay, we have painstakingly put the pieces together. We have a bendy question. We have a sharply defined object or archive. We have an intentionally chosen lens for interpretation. How do we make sure it all, works, that it clicks together and actually justifies the whole effort.
This is where the final crucial element comes in, significance.
The so what factor.
Exactly. Significance is basically the answer to why does this research matter? It's the statement of the project's contribution, its justification. And Pahuja stresses, you, the researcher, must articulate this explicitly.
You can't just leave it for the reader to guess.
No, that's being hostage to fortune, as she puts it. If you don't state clearly what you think the significance of your work is, the reader might judge it by a completely different standard. Maybe they think you were trying to solve a policy problem when you were actually trying to make a subtle theoretical point. You lose control of how your work is received.
So you have to define your own measure of success.
Precisely. And this significant statement is what holds everything else together. It's the linchpin of the fit we talked about earlier.
How does it ensure the fit?
Because the significance claim has to demonstrate that this specific combination, looking at this object through this lens to answer this question, allows us to see something important that we couldn't see before, or see it differently.
It justifies the unique constellation of choices.
Yes. The fit isn't accidental. It's proven through the articulation of significance. It shows the coherence was achieved through care and craft, justifying why this method was right for this archive to address this problem.
Okay, but before we get to the significance, the payoff, we need to set the scene for the reader, right? Frame it.
Absolutely, and that's the job of the context.
Context, what does that involve?
Think of context as the picture frame for your research painting. It's the introductory part, the setup. It explains the situation, the background, the puzzle that motivates your research question in the first place.
It answers the why bother question up front.
Exactly. It answers two key questions for the reader. Why did you, the researcher, care enough to do this? And why should I, the reader, care enough to read it? It connects your specific project to a broader conversation or problem, maybe a worldly problem, a theoretical debate, or a puzzle in legal doctrine.
And if you're in a situation like writing a grant proposal where you have to frame it as problem solving,
then the context section is the place to do that. Articulate the problem, whether it's practical, theoretical, or doctrinal, right there at the beginning. Set the stage.
So context sets up the problem. Significance delivers the intellectual payoff or insight gained from the analysis.
Beautifully put. They are like rhetorical bookends for the analytical core of the research.
Okay, so this whole process, this back and forth, this focus on justification, leads to Pahuja's core model. The practice of methodology results in this critically self-reflective account that justifies the specific combination of four essential elements. Let's list them one last time.
1. Context. Why we care, why it's timely, what's the motivating problem or puzzle.
Got it.
2. Question. The specific how or what inquiry that guides the research and problematizes the subject.
The bendy question.
3. Method, which consists of the defined object archive plus the chosen interpretive lens theory.
The what and the how of the analysis.
And 4. Significance, the so what, the contribution, the justification for the whole constellation, why this matters.
And the real utility here is that this framework isn't just for writing up finished research. Right?
Not at all. It's
Yeah.
incredibly useful prospectively when you're planning a project, feeling your way, maybe in that state of unknowing at the start of a PhD. It gives you a structure for thinking through these choices.
And then retrospectively.
It gives you the perfect framework for writing that detailed, reflective, rear-facing account that's required in a dissertation introduction or a methodology chapter or even a scholarly article where you absolutely have to explain and justify the choices you made.
It really forces that continuous justification. It's not just a checklist, but a process of thinking about how you orient yourself, how you develop your own scholarly voice and approach as you go.
Exactly. It turns methodology from something you pick off a shelf into an ongoing activity of reading, writing, refining, and reflecting. The self-awareness it demands is key.
That ability to explain your own practices, know the limits of your tools, define your terms clearly, that seems to be the real measure of success here.
That's exactly what Pahuja argues. Mastering that practice is what elevates research from just a technical report into something that might actually be an enduring scholarly contribution. It gives the researcher control over their intellectual project. You know, the concluding thought from Pahuja's approach is quite powerful. It suggests that the very best research, the kind that feels profound, can manage to show us the universe in a grain of sand.
Meaning it finds deep insights in very specific studies.
Exactly. But And this is the crucial part that's only possible if the researcher maintains intense focus, care, and control over the specific grain of sand they are studying. You can't grasp the universe by trying to grasp everything at once.
In this practical methodology, this focus on fit and justification provides the structure needed to maintain that essential focus.
That's the argument. It provides the intellectual discipline to achieve that kind of focused insight and control over the research process.
Well, this has been incredibly illuminating, a real deep dive into the engine room of scholarly work. For everyone listening, we really hope this gives you some concrete tools. We encourage you to think about this further, maybe using these reflection questions based on the framework we've unpacked.
Yeah, definitely chew on these. First, what do you think is the single biggest takeaway from Pahuja's article? Is it that fundamental shift away from methodology as just a list of theories towards seeing it as a practice of writing? Or is it maybe the practical guidance on achieving that fit between the four elements: context, question, method, significance?
Good question. Second, let's think about the potential limits. Pahuja really champions problematization, pushing us towards analytical how and what questions over those problem-solving should questions. Is that emphasis maybe too restrictive sometimes? Could there be situations, perhaps moments of real crisis or urgent injustice, where asking a direct, normative, straight-line question like what should be done now is actually the most responsible or necessary scholarly stance to take? Does this framework potentially discourage urgent intervention?
That's a tough one, worth considering. And finally, a more practical application. Take those concepts of bendy questions versus straight-line questions, and also the idea of genre confusion, that tension between scholarly problematization and policy problem-solving.
Okay.
Try applying those ideas to a current debate that you follow, maybe something controversial in international law or politics. How might reframing the central question away from "why did this happen?" seeking simple causation, or "what should we do?" seeking an immediate solution towards "how does this situation actually function?" or "what are the underlying structures at play?" How might that shift potentially lead to a more original, more enduring, and maybe less speculative kind of insight?
Really makes you think. How could asking a different kind of question change the whole conversation? Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time, keep questioning, keep refining that craft, and keep searching for that perfect fit in your own work.